So here you go. This is the title that I have chosen today for my presentation is Decommunizing Rivers in South Asia. And the river that I have selected for this to understand this whole process of communization and decommunization is the Sone Canal, and then the Canal Act that was introduced in 1864. So, the area that I'm talking about, this is the broader region that you see on your screen. In the mid-19th century, the colonial India, particularly the regions like this, the Middle Ganga Basin, which was then part of Bengal, larger Bengal, it grappled with acute environmental vulnerabilities, and it faced recurrent droughts and inundation and famines. Then this was the first half of the 19th century. And then also, quite late in the 18th century. So we had a very massive famine of 1770, which devastated the entire Bengal region. But particularly in the region that I'm talking about, it faced massive famine also in the year 1852. And there were many deaths because of that famine. But then I would like to actually tell you that the entire region was a drought-prone region, and then it was also a flood-prone region. But then flood in the modern concept, flood not as flood, but as inundation. Now, inundation never killed people. But the flood, the moment we started believing that this inundation is a flood, it became a calamity. So it was actually the whole idea of flood came in the very late when the British colonial government took over and ruled the country. And that's why, this becomes very important. And that is why I always believe that why there are no instances of famines happening in this part of Middle Ganga Basin in the earlier centuries. And it all started when the British colonial rule was established and the famine started taking place. Now, these are the few of the contradictions that we find. So ultimately what happens that there was a massive famine in 1842, and the area I've selected is the Shahabad region. This is roughly the area right in the Middle Ganga Basin, right at the southwest corner. You see the circled area. That's the Shahabad area, Shahabad district, and it is located on the western part, southwestern part of the Mid-Ganga Basin. And this was one region which was supposedly the most affected region due to famine. So there were many deaths. Now, there was one colonel, his name was Colonel, he was a military engineer. His name was Colonel C.H. Dickens. And he was trained in various European universities on the canal systems. And he actually emerged as a key advocate for large-scale canal irrigation as a technological intervention to mitigate these risks. Now, as early as 1853, immediately after that, Dickens actually proposed harnessing the waters of the Sone River. Now, there was a Sone River flowing. You can see this. The river that is flowing from here, it is actually the Sone River. Now, this river, he said that if we can divert this river to these drier areas of Shahabad, we can, counter the famines in future. So basically, he proposed a kind of a large-scale canal irrigation project. And this was kind of a technological intervention to mitigate the risk of the famines happening in this area. So he suggested that we should have a comprehensive irrigation system which would cater to these drier areas. And he recommended to the government that the Sone Canal will help in drought protection, and it will also then control the flood, because the surplus water which actually leads to flood would then flow through the canals. So if we create a huge water body through the Anicut, then the huge water can be diverted through the canals into the drier areas. So through this, the government would be in a position, that's what he understood, it would stabilize the crop yield in Shahabad as well as, in the adjacent territories of, these areas of Patna and Gaya. So these were adjacent areas. So he wanted these areas also to be served by the canals created by the Sone. So the Sone River would also then send water, supply water to these areas. Now, the Colonel Dickens' design was influenced by European models, and we had many of the British navigational canals that were dug up in Europe. And then before him, there was one very big, huge project that was undergoing and that became actually complete by that time, and that was the Ganga Canal. Now that the construction had already begun in 1842, as we know, and Probby Cotley was the main engineer for that project. Now this model actually influenced the project that Dickens was suggesting. But then my understanding is that the whole success story, I mean, the kind of glorification that Dickens talked about, actually gave credence to what we see as 1864 Canal Act. So, although, the construction of the Sone Canal could not take off immediately after his suggestion in 1853, because there was a revolt, a major, massive revolt which took place in India at that time. It's called 1857 revolt, and that and the British government became hesitant to take up any project at that time because it was worried whether the government would continue or not. By that time, it was all under the control of East India Company, trading company, and this Middle Ganga Basin was one of the very important hub of that revolt. So the government was very about taking up such projects, but immediately after the revolt subsided for different reasons, we are not here to talk about that, but then when the revolt subsided, then the government took up this project of building the canal. So this, I think that Dickens' model directly influenced, because this 1864 Canal Act was basically meant for Bengal. And Bengal had all these river systems. So the Middle Ganga Basin and the Lower Ganga Basin have a river system which is quite different from what we find in the Upper Ganga Canal. So it's an Upper Ganga Basin where you have the gorges, deep gorges from where the Ganga flows. But in the Middle Ganga Basin and the Lower Ganga Basin, the rivers flow through plains. And that's why I think Dickens' model was more influential in bringing up this 1864 Canal Act. So basically what it did, that 1864 Canal Act, when it was introduced in 1864, it amended and consolidated the laws governing the toll collection on canals and the navigational improvements, and even taking up many of the lands of the peasants, asking them to leave the area. So many of the lands were taken over by the government, and then this is the way this 1864 Canal Act helped. And then what we see is that these canal projects, when it became active, the project became active, it was realized that many of the drier regions of Patna, Gaya, and even the Shahabad area, they were supplied with these surplus water coming from the Sone. But then, there were repercussions of these, and this were being felt by the people themselves. And there were critical consequences. What I think that this is one of the decommunization that has been done, because Sone was a common property resource. It was being used by everyone, and now you have put canals on it. You have stopped the Sone River, and now you are charging from the people to use the irrigated water provided by the canal. So it's a kind of a decommunization that has been done, and that process itself comes with a lot of other problems. So there were critical consequences of this decommunization of the river system, where the traditional communal access to the rivers as shared resources was supplanted by state monopolization. So prior to the construction of the Sone Canal, irrigation in Shahabad area and particularly and other areas like Gaya and Patna regions. This is the early construction photograph that was undertaken at that time. Now, after the construction of this canal, the Sone Canal, what we see is that the crop plan of the entire region was changed. Now, many of the Kharif crop, which was already a common crop earlier also, it was then also, in addition to the Kharif crop, now the Rabi crops, which are actually winter crops. When the water becomes, unavailable to this part, it started being produced in the area. So both Kharif and the Rabi crops were being produced. Now, one of the repercussions of this is that now you are not leaving the land uncultivated for the entire year. So now in the earlier system, what we had, that there were crop rotations of different types, and that actually led to the fertility so the soil used to get fertile through its automatic process. Now this was eliminated altogether. Now you're supplying water to these areas, and this has further led to in the long run, led to the salinity of the soil in those areas. So, in these regions, we had many interesting traditional ways of doing irrigation. We had a Ahar system, we had pine system, where when the flood water would come, the villagers together would dig up long, water bodies and the canals to bring the surplus water to their fields. So, this is something which is very interesting, because in this area, when you have, it's not that the people will never realize about the inundation that takes place in the Sone River during the summer season, but then that was used in a more positive way, and it was then supplied to different areas through pine and Ahar systems. Now, after this implementation, there were many complaints from the farmers, and the farmers' perception was completely different. And they thought that their old system was much superior in order to produce, various kinds of crops, and they had no problem at all about, the food production, and they were being produced in enough quantity for their needs. Now, there were often complaints about the destruction of the traditional system, about waterlogging, about drainage obstructions leading to various adverse health outcomes, particularly malaria, and there were irregular supply and lack of control over canal water. Now, over time, what we see is that the canal's expansion facilitated agricultural transformation of the region. There is no doubt about it. But the land under cultivation increased, because now what you have done, that you have now allowed, through the canal supply, you have allowed many of the vulnerable areas to be cultivated by these irrigated channels. And then in the short run, what we see is that the production, the yields, has actually improved dramatically. Now, that's how it was being projected, that the canal system, the modern canal system, has been a very great success. But let me tell you that after few decades, this is the old honeycut that we find in that area. This is one of the recent photographs that one of my students, Rakesh, had taken this photograph during the field work that we went there. So this is a photograph I have taken. I asked him to send the photograph. So this is an old honeycut, which was earlier, constructed to stop the water, the Sone River water, and then supplied to the canals. Now, this became desolate. This became unusable because of the huge siltation that takes place. And then upstream, 8 to 10 kilometers upstream, there was another, modern barrage that was to be constructed. That was in 1960s. Then, this siltation problem is still there. This is another problem which is coming up. But then, you just have to keep on, shifting your barrages. Maybe 50 years down the line, even this barrage could become unusable, or maybe there'll be huge siltation just before the barrage. So there are these barrages have their own problem. Now, what we see is that the excludability and subtractability dynamics are very much in place here, and the transformation of the river through canalization actually exemplifies the emergence of excludability. That is, who is allowed to access and under what terms who can use these canal waters is something which became very important. And then you also have the subtractability, because now the individuals who were using water, their use of water became subtracted from, because it is no more a collective resource. So it has actually, this excludability and subtractability has come together with decommunization in this area. Now, of course, one of the problems that I just told you is about this Indrapuri barrage, the new modern barrage that was constructed upstream 10 kilometers. But this is again becoming a big problem for the region. With this, I end my presentation. If you have any questions, if I have some time left, questions are welcome. This historically, one of the problems with many of the Asian regions is that they have gone through, the whole process of colonization, many of the Asian regions. And that is one of the, I think people have not used the term decommunization in that sense earlier, but many scholars have talked about the implication of the colonial rule and how the resources were exploited, and then these were problems for the local community. So they have done away with the traditional systems, and all the common resources were then decommunized. So we are calling it as decommunization, but historians have never been using such terms in their historical analysis, but although they have been doing that. So I just, in your own context, through your own field work that you have done, so can you give us a story? Any story that you see, like, the fishery story that you have, many I know.
Because I am a food historian, so especially Professor Nayak and Professor Sim mentioned about the farming, the history of farming, and that your talk is always based on the tragedy such as famine and also flood and the things. So, what is this is one my first question is what relationship between the colonization, so the future colonization, and the historical tragedy of such as disasters, famine, and the flood. Because in Japan, the Satoshi talks about the colonization of the water was based on the tragedy of the drought and the little water. So we historians always use and always mention the history as a lessons, historical lessons, and as a not only the lessons but also the identity, as Professor Nayak said, cultural identity for the inhabitants in those areas. So yeah, this is the first question about so the relationship between the history of Brazil and also the colonization in the future. So the first question, and the second question is about especially for Professor Nayak and Professor Sim. In my interest, so the Indian history is closely related to the Green Revolution in the 1960s. So Green Revolution is, in my opinion, the Green Revolution is a very big process of decolonization, I think. So what do you think about in the 1960s so Green Revolution in India and the relationship between your talks and the American or the global decolonization through the breeding, rice or wheat breeding, modernization. So this is my comment and questions.
Pradeep, would you like me to first?
First and then.
Yes, please. Yeah,
I'm
you
sorry,
could address the colonization part. Yes.
Yes. So very interesting comments from Professor. One of the things that I actually.
So Tatsi,
Professor Tatsi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, one of the things that you were mentioning, whether it gives a lessons for future, because particularly in cases of Asia and many of the countries in Asia, we have seen that there has been colonial rule, and then the whole process of decommunization has taken place. Now, of course, in modern times, we cannot just revert the entire process. That we cannot just revert back to communization, right? Once the decommunization has been done, it is impossible. Like you have modern societies who are dependent on canals. I mean, the barrages have been constructed, and you just cannot, just demolish all the barrages and say that now you are back to the 18th century situation. Yeah. That's not quite possible. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, these provide models for the future, and these are models because now it tells us that when we take any decisions, that means the states take decision, it means that you need to involve the communities. So community involvement is one of the important dimensions for all the measures that the state takes. Now, in most of the cases, what we have seen, sometimes the communization takes place in different other ways, but decommunization process takes form in different other ways. But in most of the cases, what we have seen that it is the state which has been responsible for the decommunization process. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the takes that we get from all our historical analysis, many case studies, that when community involvement is so very important. We were just doing one of the workshops and a conference in Delhi about the fisheries, the 14th Asian Fisheries Conference, and we had different stories from the fishing communities. But we have seen that there are actually very positive implications when the communities are involved in the fisheries. So the idea is that we should learn from what we have done in the past, yes, and then develop the models in a more positive way. Right. And one of the learnings that we get is that you should involve the communities. The second aspect that I actually was very impressed, and I'm happy that you put up this question about the Green Revolution. And I think Green Revolution is actually, I partially agree with you, that it is one way, the food has been decommunized. The whole production process has been decommunized. Because the major beneficiaries from the Green Revolution were the people who were having large farmlands. Yes. So all the smaller farmers were not the actual beneficiary of the Green Revolution. And I know this story that how Barlow had taken a clue from what was being produced in Japan at that time, not in 10. Yeah, right. That was the wheat that was being produced. That was actually when US soldiers came here, they had taken the plant from Japan and then that became one of the clues for the Americans to develop those plants, the hybrid variety of wheat. And this is so very important. When these were being implemented, there were politics behind it. There is a politics of taking these wheats, these hybrid variety of wheats to different developing countries at the time, because you also had parallelly the TVA model which was being advertised. TVA, Tennessee Valley model.
Right.
That was So that was being advertised by United States, and people, those who had worked in TVA had actually joined the various World Bank and youth organizations, various financial organizations, and they were going around in developing countries and saying that, why don't you follow that model of TVA, which actually would give you a lot of water and all the drier area would become so much irrigated. And then these hybrid varieties had their own problems, limitations. It needed a lot of water. So, and then a lot of pesticides. So over the years, what we have seen, the kind of problems that we see, one of the hubs of the Green Revolution in India was the Punjab region. The Punjab and Malwa region. And today, after say 70, 80 years, what you see is that the most of the families have a cancer patient. And it is because of the Green Revolution. It is because of, so Green Revolution in the short run has certainly increased the production of wheat tremendously. But then at the same time, it has come with larger problems, and that's the health. So you are now, what you're doing, that you have to invest a lot of your money on your health. And that, I think, Green Revolution actually, this is something which somebody should actually work on about because Green Revolution as such is a decommunization process. You have, decommunized the earlier traditional varieties of grains. Yeah. Yeah.
It's better. We have to talk and then provide in and the last two also.
Right. So now, you want to speak?
Okay.
So, first from our side, I would like to talk in relation to the comments and the question of Tatsushi. And then I also have a very interesting story about more and more theoretical thoughts by Pratik. Okay, I'm sorry, I know that. But it's I'm thinking it's in the last year WCH 2024. I could not come because no flight. But it's a very interesting talk between the communization and the decommunization, decoupling of these two different elements. It's so interesting story to be made. And then I think about your comments in the question, especially historical tragedies or disasters, and so on. So historical development or communization, which kind of relationship. And I have thought that it's the word in Celtic, building resilience is a way of dealing with vulnerability. It's very, very important point, I think. But which kind of resilience? Which kind of vulnerability? And this, so I'm so many multidimensional elements also has so many historical processes. For example, in my case, it's reservoirs forms always between the two elements, resilience and vulnerability, because so big reservoirs is always deconstructed. It's all floods. So and so many other tragedies come. And then my project, I cannot nearly answer, but it's a scope of the type of resilience is so different because ancient times in Japan's big ponds, big reservoirs, is huge. It's a whole region or cultivated with water of the big ponds. That's a more and more modern construction. It's also from the history of ponds and reservoirs in Japan. It's first time it's so modern topics.
Right.
It's so big national event. But in early modern times, it's more and more commonization of smaller ponds. In the mountain areas especially, so many small ponds, only one family can construct. But so big ponds, big reservoirs is different. So I cannot speak about this in my presentation, but the history of three or probably more histories of reservoirs pond when we can thinking about this. So which kind of resilience to be as more focused, or which kind of vulnerability to be focused.
Thank you. Very fruitful comment. So let's go open this floor. So any comments?
Okay. Hello, I'm Lin Jingwu from the University of China. We have the Center of Ecological History. So actually, I am a historian who is interested in the history of opium cultivation and family histories in Bihar during the 19th century. So I think, according to the topic of the panel, is totally about the colonization and decolonization, right? It's totally different. So the professor purpose in your research is quite is quite important for my research. So, but I really enjoy listening your talk today, which actually inspired me to 2 points. That's also the questions I want to ask for you. And because you mentioned the British Canal project in the 1864, right? Which is a very important timing for this area, especially in the middle Ganga river. Yeah. So the first question is about how these canal projects during this period, during this time, have the impact on the type of cropping pattern. Because you have mentioned the rabi crops, right? Opium is kind of important rabi crops during that period, and cultivating opium, it requires a lot of water, a lot of irrigation in the area. So the timing of cultivating opium and your canal project actually have overlap. So I'm just curious about how it impacts the canal project brought on the cultivating opium. This is the first question. And a second question is about, I'm just curious a lot on this part. In your book, you had mentioned the different impacts brought by the volcano projects in different areas. But I'm just curious about how differently the project impacts the northern bank of the river and the southern bank. This is totally different. I know the irrigation tradition is good at the southern part, but in the northern part, they benefit a lot from those endowation. Oh, sure. I finished. I will finish there. Yes, just the 2 questions for you. Thank you.
What do you want? 1 minute. Okay. So very quickly, just because we are short of time, 2 things. One, that of course the cropping pattern changed the moment these canals were constructed. One of the ideas was, of course, the more sustainable revenue that is to be extracted. The other idea was to change the cropping pattern. So, of course, it helped in the production of opium, and that has actually worked very well for these regions. The second point that you just mentioned about the river system, and in fact, the entire Middle Ganga basin is divided by the major river, that's Ganga, and many of the rivers are actually coming from the Himalayas and joining the Ganga. So the problem is that, when you deal with these rivers and you consider these rivers as problematic, then it becomes a problem, because the communities who were living in those areas were never believing these rivers to be a problem. Although there were networks of rivers all around, but it was never a problem for them. But in the southern part of the Mid-Ganga basin, we just have 2-3 major rivers. So one of them is, of course, Sone River that I just talked about, and there's another one called. So there are two different geographies within the Mid-Ganga basin. And that has to be taken into consideration when we talk about all this. And just to, should I conclude?
Okay, thank you so much. And unfortunately, we have to close this session, but thank you very much for all participants, all presenters, very fruitful. Yeah. So then, we have to continue this.